the 8 weeks from the day you were funded on the loan through the next 8 weeks. Rules are going to be subject to change, and there's a lot of discussion right now about the possibility of extending that 8-week period. But right now, those are the final rules. So it's best to look at utilizing those funds the way that they were set out to be utilized under the CARES Act. So we're recommending to all of our clients that you start measuring the utilization of that loan so that you're setting yourself up properly for forgiveness on the back end. And again, that includes spending 75% of the loan on qualified payroll-related expenses, which are wages, employee benefits, retirement costs, and state unemployment costs. And then probably making sure that you measure and track that for those 8 weeks to make sure that you're utilizing it properly. The second piece of that question, you have a requirement. There's going to be a look back period where they measure to make sure that you used 75% of the loan funds on the amount of payroll that qualified for the amount that you got. So there's going to be 2 different look back periods they're going to let you pick from. We're actually developing those reports for our clients now. You do not have to have exactly the same people come back to work. Certainly, I think most small and mid-sized employers are looking to bring back all of the staff that they may have laid off or furloughed during the exercise. But to the extent, and unfortunately, there's some unintended consequences of the high level of unemployment benefits that employees are receiving now. So if an employee refuses to come back, you certainly have the right to replace them. But in the aggregate, under the CARES Act, you're going to have to still spend that 75% of the loan on wages during that qualified period. So hopefully that answers the question.
Maybe we you touched on another question, maybe I'll just kind of tag it, and it says about employees refusing to come back to work. We know in Michigan, the governor has talked about protecting employees that are fearful for coming back to work. But we have these businesses that are struggling with utilizing those PPP funds for payroll. What kind of suggestions do you have some of our businesses that are struggling with that scenario? Well, I think we might have lost some. Looks like it's
so that's an evolving area as well. I'm sorry, can you hear me, Kelly?
Yeah, you said I'm getting a signal that says your bandwidth is low.
Well, that would be concerning. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, we can hear you. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So one of the things that we believe may be in the final rules is that maybe changing the ratio of the 75% of the weight of your loan has to be applied to wages, because there's a lot of small businesses out there today that are having that same complaint, that they can't put that amount of money to work from the PPP loan itself. However, at the end of the day, the current rules stand that you're in order to get forgiveness down the road, you're going to want to use 75% of that loan on your wages. So to the extent that you can use it on the wages and use the ratio of the 75%, we'd highly recommend it, because there's other rules outside of that right now. But to the extent that you did receive a loan, you're bringing people back to work, and perhaps maybe you only put 50% to work on wages and you can't do better than that, make sure that you're doing it, because you will have an opportunity to request loan forgiveness down the road, and the SBA may be open to reducing the amount of the forgiveness, but still giving forgiveness on the loan.
So it sounds like that record keeping is going to be real critical.
We believe so.
Okay.
Kelly, if I can jump in on this, the other aspect of this is the communication aspect with the employees, with the workforce, to reach out to them with what is the business doing to ensure a safe and clean workplace. What are the new policies? What will be the new normal within that workplace? So the thing that we have to keep in mind, as in any sort of business, but especially in a small business, is that you can't assume somebody knows something, right? So to communicate with them or to not communicate with them is sort of doing it at your own peril. So if you don't set the information encouraging them with what you're doing with safety protocols and the new normal of the workplace, they will set their own narrative. They'll set their own messaging. Geez, we must not be doing anything, or boy, I'm, and then getting nervous about coming back and that sort of thing. So I would encourage your members, Kelly, to realize the importance of communication and to setting the narrative and trying to think through what the employees might be thinking, what their concerns might be, and trying to proactively address those.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's very important. Maria, let's turn to you for a second. Help me understand the benefits of working with a company like Trion Solutions during unprecedented times like we're facing?
Well, as Craig mentioned, we've been there, and Jeff for that matter, they've been there communicating with our clients all the way and providing them with the reports that they need to go ahead and apply for the payroll protection program. We've been providing them with assistance, even as far as this is how you make a face mask, putting videos on our website. We've been in constant communication with them and letting them know that they have a place to go to when they have questions or they need assistance. And that goes for the clients as well as the employees of those clients.
Okay, great. Thank you. Craig, let's jump back to you. So we have let's see, we have some very specific questions about application. One of them just came in from our audience, and that's, where can I get the application that needs to be submitted for loan forgiveness following the 8-week period of PPP?
Excellent question. So there's not an established application for the forgiveness right now. As everybody that did receive the payroll protection plan loan, you know that you received that through a qualified SBA lender, whether it's through your regular bank or you did an online banking institution or a credit union or something similar. The same practice is going to be kept in place by the SBA, is that they're going to allow roughly just under 6,000 lending institutions around the country to handle the forgiveness component of that loan, just like they did in handling the underwriting of getting the loan in the first place. What we saw through the whole process, and we have several hundred clients that we help support and get them the data to get their loan in the first place, and that was in hundreds of different lenders, is that every lender was a little bit different in their underwriting process, and we're expecting that every lender is going to be just a little bit different in their forgiveness process as well. Right now, under the rules right now, you're going to have to make sure that you're going to be able to support that you used the loan proceeds during the 8 weeks preceding the loan, 75% on the qualified work-related expenses like payroll, benefits, retirement that we talked about. And then you're going to have to be able to say, did you use that on full-time, on the proper amount of full-time equivalents, which is a measurement that is coming out of the rules on these look-back periods. So one of the things you want to do is make sure you take the rules today, how you can use the proceeds. We highly suggest, and not only just the wages in the benefits, but make sure the other 25% of the proceeds are being utilized on a limited number of other expenses, such as rent, interest, and utilities. Keep a good documentation of those records, because there is going to be a time you're going to go back to your lender. You're going to say, okay, we've depleted the loan proceeds. I want to make application for the forgiveness. And you're going to want to have, I'm sure that they're going to all ask for pretty detailed records of how you spent the funds.
Okay, great. And let's, you talked about the different lenders kind of approaching this differently. One of our questions sent in was about the secondary market where financial institutions could sell the loans. The question came up on, do second parties have the right to reduce the forgiveness if they want to without penalty or argument?
So I think that's going to be something that's still to be determined. Right now, you have a loan. Well, let's say you got a loan from Bank of America. So you have loan documentation from Bank of America. Unless those loans are sold off, which we haven't seen anything in the current rules that says they may or may not be able to do that. But if they're holding your loan documents, that's going to be the lending institution that has to qualify under the SBA guidelines whether or not you're going to have forgiveness. Because you'll keep in mind, there's been upwards of 4 million loans made so far. Pretty unprecedented in really, to the SBA's credit, the execution of getting those loans out, 4 million loans out in less than 60 days is a monumental task. But loan forgiveness is going to be even tougher, we believe. So to try and forgive 4 million loans, I don't think you're going to see many of those loans be moved out of the lenders that held them in the first place.
Okay, thank you. Jeff, let's jump over to you. What are some of the biggest mistakes made during crises like that with our businesses?
Well, the biggest mistake is almost always not being prepared enough. And I think one thing that's been reinforced through this COVID-19 pandemic is how inherently fragile businesses are. Never did we think that businesses could be shut down as abruptly as they have. And so even when thinking through potential crisis scenarios for a business, which very few businesses do a very good job of, because it's hard enough to keep up with day-to-day work, no less planning for a potential crisis. But when we look at potential vulnerabilities, in my book that I wrote, I have a 7-step process to managing a business crisis. And the first step is identifying the vulnerabilities of the business. So, in my book, I think I listed like 20 vulnerabilities that many businesses or most businesses could potentially face, and a pandemic was not one of them. So these things do evolve over time, but every business ought to be looking at what would we do if our business all of a sudden ran into a significant crisis of some sort. And if you look at the business continuity plans and how we would communicate, how we would reach customers, how our employees would work, if we had to work off-site and some of those sorts of things, it ought to be able to stand up to just about any sort of crisis, including a pandemic. So I always say that the most important 4 words that come out of a crisis should be, what have we learned? And I think that's the thing that businesses should be thinking about. What have we learned from this? How do we wish we would have been better prepared? Who do we need to start partnering with going forward to make sure that we are as prepared as we could possibly be for the next time something, it may not be a pandemic, but it might be something else. But either way, how can we make sure our business continues, that we communicate effectively, that our workforce is motivated and knows exactly what the business ought to be focused on?
Yeah, and I agree. The chamber does a preparedness event every year, and we do focus on contingency development plans. And there is no way that we ever address working from home for 40 days where we're at today. When we may be short-term shutdown due to water or electrical, but nowhere in the lengths of 40 days. So I think we have a whole new component to add on going forward with that event. And Maria, let me turn this over to you. When we look at
For sure.
when we look at what we're talking about today, what did Tryon do specifically for their clients and prospective clients during COVID?
Again, communication, and I attribute that to Jeff. He's done a great job making sure that correspondence has gone out to our clients as well as our prospective clients. I oversee the sales team here in Troy, and what I told my team is to be very relevant to our prospective clients. Always follow up with them, make sure they're okay, follow up and send them information that would be helpful for them. Call them, ask them if they need anything. We're basically staying on top of them as well as our existing clients, making sure that they have the support that they need, whether it be a report or a piece of correspondence or a communication that Jeff has forwarded to our team that would be helpful to them. We have just stayed on top of them and let them know that they've got support here at Solutions.
Yeah, we've been doing something very similar with the chamber. We call it compassion calls. And Jeff, this might be back to you. I'm not sure if it's Jeff or Craig, but how do you go about communicating bad news during times like this, like laying off or shutting down a business?
Yeah, I think there's one key principle to always think through when you're presenting bad news is of course we want to be clear and concise and simple with the messaging so that no one gets confused with what is being communicated. But I always like the idea of, if you're communicating bad news to someone, try to explain to them how you arrived at the decision. They may not agree with the decision. They may not be happy about the decision, but I think it's really important to let them know how you arrived at it. The fact that you put yourself in their shoes as much as you could. The fact that you had to look at the totality of the business and the future of the business moving forward in making this very difficult decision, and to show some empathy and taking your time to explain the thought process that you went through on that. I think if you do that, again, somebody might not agree with it, but would at least say, you know what, I disagree with it, I'm disappointed, I don't like the decision that you came up with, but I respect the fact that you considered my feelings in it. I respect the fact that you took your time and explained to me how you thought through the issue and therefore arrived at the decision that you did.
Okay, that's great advice. Thank you. Craig, let's stay along that same bad news. If we're looking at furloughed employees and we decide that we're not going to call everyone back, you've already stated that that's okay to do. Will this impact our workman's comp? Because as of right now, under the CARES Act, that's not.
Great question.
I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, I'm sorry. So workers' compensation right now is an interesting field. It's a great question. Generally speaking, and this applies to just about all 50 states, a pandemic like the one we've been experiencing, where you have a communicable disease that's really something that's subject to the entire population, is generally never considered an eligible illness under the workers' compensation statutes in any state. In most of the case laws is pretty clear on that. That said, we are already just 2 months into the COVID-19 outbreak, and a handful of states have already made special rulings to include contracting COVID in the workplace to be covered as a covered eligible claim. So that's a tough one. You've never had to deal with that before. Now, how do you define and qualify to make sure that you can attest to the fact that you got your claim while you were in the workplace? Most likely, you're going to need to have worked in the healthcare community or a hospital or something similar, where you're subject to that to the illness while you're on duty. It's going to be very hard to establish that you contracted COVID-19 if you were an essential worker at a grocery store. It's going to be hard to establish if you were an essential worker in our payroll department at Trion Solutions. So there are some limitations on that. And the upside is where you've seen a few states like the state of Washington, the state of California, that have come out and proactively said, even though historically the case law and precedent is that we don't cover these types of claims, we're going to proactively make carriers cover them. They're also, it's important to keep an eye on what they're doing, is they're also saying, we're not going to apply those claims to your experience rating factor as an employer, which is a very important component, because this was really something that was outside of your risk control, it was outside of your workplace control, and really shouldn't have an impact on your experience rating on your workers' compensation costs. So it's an evolving gray area for sure.
Right, definitely. Along the same lines too, we had a question about that they understand that they can reduce their pay up to 25% without penalty. Do they have the option to pay full pay to those who come back and 25% less to those who choose not to, or would that be considered discrimination? So we call some employees back and pay them full, and the other ones that they're not able to recall back, can they reduce it by 25%?
Yeah, I'm not sure that that's entirely accurate. So unless you're part of a bargaining agreement, a union agreement that stipulates a mandate of how much I have to compensate you, as long as I'm meeting the minimum wage requirements in my state and federal law, I don't have a contractual obligation to meet any pay requirement. I always have the ability to go back and adjust that compensation. So, and you've seen that with a number of large national employers where they've made adjustments. So I don't know that that's a great constructive approach either. I mean, for some employers, it's a mandate. You just don't have the economics to get through without it. But where you may have challenges down the road is it's really bad for morale. When we start taking off again, that I reduced your compensation. For some people that just not accept that, you may have potential for litigation down the road because you used it to constructively reduce compensation. Right now, there is no federal protection or state protection that says you are allowed to reduce your compensation during this. So if I'm an individual, I didn't like what you did during the COVID outbreak, and you reduced my compensation by 20%, I may come back to you down the road and say, hey, we had an implied contract and you broke it by reducing my compensation because you didn't really have a right to do that. So that's going to be a tough one. I think every employer has to look at that. And then you have to say, am I looking at survival of my business? And that's something that has to go along with it strategically. And/or what am I looking to do, from the standpoint of compensation at the time? Perhaps you can go back to a sector of your employees and say, hey, if I do need to reduce your compensation, I'm going to reduce it maybe in the form of cash and defer it for a bonus down the road or something of that nature. So those are the kind of things that you may want to take a look at.
Kelly, I think you're muted.
Thank you. There was a question that came in the chat room. What happens if we increase pay, such as hazardous pay, for essential workers? Is that going to cause any problems with loan forgiveness?
So that's a really good question. We've had a ton of our clients that come to us and say, we really would like to give some, for those folks that do have essential workers in the work sites, we'd like to give them, we'll call it hazard pay, for example. It's not necessarily gonna challenge your loan forgiveness. The good thing is when we do the look back, they're gonna let you qualify the FTEs, and the FTEs right now under the rules seem to say that we're going to look back at the aggregate hours. They do two different periods that they do the look back test on. One period is for 3.5 months in 2019, and then the other period is for the first 2 months of 2020. And then you're going to come up with an equation for full-time equivalents. The full-time equivalent is being driven out of an average of 30 hours. So it's actually going to bring that number, it's going to bring that number up for compensation. So you can spread more compensation out on less employees, theoretically. So when you calculate that all out, giving the excess compensation for hazard pay or something to that effect really shouldn't have much to do with that. Separate but related, we've had a number of clients that received loan proceeds and called up and said, hey, listen, I had 50 people working for us before. 30 of them really are doing great on this extra shot in the arm by the federal unemployment benefits. We're going to let those 30, kind of take advantage of that. But we want to use most of the 75%, our other 20. That's not going to pass the test. That's just not going to get there.
Okay, and one last question before I go on to another panelist. What's the risk of terminating an employee terminating an employee for cause during this time? Is there not laying them off but terminating during the crisis we're facing? Any risk there as an employer?
Well, there's, we like to think there's always risk of terminating an employee at any time, for sure, depending on the circumstances. But there's really a couple very specific, you're limited to maybe 2 circumstances right now. One is if you have an essential worker that violates company policy while they're at work during this time, you're going to document that. And if they violated policy, you certainly can terminate them. And then the biggest one is an employee that refuses to come to work, whether it be one of these people that enjoys the excess unemployment benefits. Mm-hmm. And when you ask them to come to work so you can pay them the PPP loan, they say no. You can absolutely, if they refuse it, you can absolutely terminate them. It also allows you the ability to suspend their unemployment benefits. And really that's something that you have to make those decisions as an individual employer, but at the same time, these are things that have an impact on your business if you don't take that action. So really, no, we don't anticipate to be any additional strength for an employee on a wrongful discharge claim, for example, during this time, as long as you're practicing the same kind of procedures you did before. I'm terminating you for cause, against company policy, or just a refusal to accept employment when I called you back.
Mm-hmm. I know one of our members has been working with calling employees back, and you mentioned about if they don't come back when you call them back, you can terminate them, but they have been responding with their fearful of catching COVID. From what I've been reading and learning and sharing with our members, that's where that preparedness plan, the safety protocols all really come into play, and having that in place. And that's kind of your backup, that you've created a safe environment. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's an excellent point. You want to have that. A written communication on that is certainly the best, kind of to Jeff's point. One of the things that helps you too, if you're one of those people you've called back and they say, I just don't feel comfortable, I don't want to come back. One of the things you're going to want to document, maybe ask them the CDC questions, because if you're not in one of these kind of high risk categories that the CDC has identified in writing, it'll weaken their case to feel uncomfortable about coming back to the work site. Okay, great information. And that kind of segues great over to Jeff, and we talk about, how do you prepare as a business and individual for the next crisis? What are some keys that you think are really necessary that we should focus on as businesses?
Well, first, fundamentally, that you can do more to prepare for a crisis than you might think as a business. Remember, I mentioned that the first step is identifying your vulnerabilities and looking at, I like to look at drawing a line down the middle of a piece of paper, and on the left-hand side, putting out, if we were ever to have a crisis situation in our business, what's the most likely scenario that could occur? And, you might write down some things. It could be a quality issue. It could be the health of the CEO, or could be a lawsuit, could be a number of things on the left side, those that are most likely to happen. On the right-hand side are those potential scenarios that may not be necessarily likely to happen, but if they were to happen, would be disastrous or could be disastrous to the business if we're not prepared for it. And certainly a pandemic might be on the right-hand side of that, but there would be some other others that might be on that side. And sometimes if you have to bring it down to 10 or 15 different vulnerabilities on each side of the piece of paper, then you can start looking at which ones maybe are on both sides, which ones are both, would be extremely damaging if they were to happen and would also be likely to occur. And those are the ones that your crisis plan really has to be able to live up to. And when I say the crisis plan and identifying vulnerabilities, recognizing that almost every crisis is preceded by some sort of a warning sign. In fact, even this pandemic, there were warning signs of it. You know, the Bill Gates of mentioning it in a TED Talk speech in 2015, the Spanish flu that happened, the bubonic plague, the third cholera pandemic, all of these different things that might lead you to believe that that sort of thing could have happened. So really thinking through the vulnerabilities and looking at what can be done to prevent the vulnerabilities from turning into a crisis. And some things maybe it's more of a management than it is eliminating it. But again, if you think about that, almost every crisis is preceded by some sort of a warning sign, then you say, okay, let's make sure that we're not brushing warning signs under the rug if it's happening in our business. So let's try to address that. And then what can we do if in fact that were to turn into a crisis? What can we do now to prepare for it? Or what would we need to be able to have if that were to ever occur? You know, you take the 2003 incident where there was a blackout. And remember, we lost cell phone use, telephone use, and so on. And we think about, okay, how difficult it was to reach people and that kind of thing. What would happen if that sort of thing were to occur again? And whatever warning signs that you might think about in your business. So I really encourage all your members to take a look at what vulnerabilities there might be. And if you ever do a little corporate retreat or any of that sort of thing with the management teams of the businesses, is to go through and to do some of this crisis planning.
And when you develop a plan like that, how often do you suggest that it be reviewed and evaluated for currency?
Well, that's a very good question, because one thing that a lot of businesses do is they develop a big plan, big 3-ring binder, they go through all the process, and then they stick it on a shelf somewhere and never look at it again. So you're much better off I'm not a big fan of those big 3-ring binder type things, but getting it down to a very simplified plan on who would do what, who would be engaged in what, who's part of the crisis team, what would we do, how would we reach each other, who are our top clients and how would we make contact with them, and so on. And I do think, Kelly, it's a very good point that you really need to look at that, depending on the vulnerability of a business. And some businesses are more vulnerable, or higher risk businesses. They're in higher risk industries than others. And those might be something that you would look at every quarter, every 6 months sort of thing. Other businesses you could get away with a little bit longer period of time. One thing you don't want to do is forget about the fact that you even had a plan and what that plan was all about. So bring it out, talk about it, go back and look at it, sort of do sort of an audit with quote marks around it, to look at it and to make sure it's relevant every 6 months or so.
Yeah, I think that's a good And Maria, we'll jump over to you. When we look at something like this, a lot of times we talk about our small businesses, our businesses that people who started a passion, right? They started their business to pursue a passion, and that's what they're really good at. Sometimes running business, and lots of us are not really prepared to deal with what we're facing today. Tell us, like, for Tryon and your client companies, do you tell them how to run their business? What does that look like to a business owner?
No, I always tell everybody that, talking about myself and members of my team, we have like the best job here at Trion Solutions because we get to meet with real interesting business owners and business leaders and learn about their businesses, learn about how they're doing things currently. And oftentimes you're absolutely right. Someone starts a business because of a passion. It's something they're very good at. And all of a sudden they find themselves as an employer and they're dealing with things like workers' compensation audits, payroll taxes, ensuring compliance. And then all of a sudden they find themselves backlogged with a bunch of paper that they seriously don't want to deal with. So what I like to do is go in and meet with a prospective client and learn about them, learn about their business, what makes them tick, how are they doing things currently, and in a perfect world, how does your HR and your HR administration look like to you? And bring it back to the office, and we devise a plan that works for that particular client. Where Trion Solutions is exceptional is, first and foremost, we listen to our clients or prospective clients. We design programs that fit their needs. We're not cookie cutter at all. We're very high touch. We meet with our clients throughout the year. My team calls their clients, meets with them at a minimum of 4 times a year to follow up with them. How are things going? What are we doing to help you? What has changed? What more can we do for you? And many businesses are outsourcing without even realizing it. They've got somebody who they rely on for their workers' compensation, their payroll administration, compliance, their 401k, things like that. Trion Solutions addresses all those needs. We're one-stop shopping. And again, we design programs to help them. So to answer your question where we're very valuable to businesses is we allow that business owner to focus on his product or service while we take care of the backroom. With regards to telling them how to run their business, we absolutely do not. Again, we align their needs with our services. We're there to support them. If they have a termination that's a little uncomfortable, they don't want to address, they call us and we help them through it. We're there to support them, not to tell them how to run their business.
Yeah, and you kind of touched on our one other question I had about businesses who feel like using a company like that really give up control. So you're looking at more of a partnership. It's a resource to rely on and fall back and partner to face HR and the different issues that you have that with a company like Trion.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Great. Thank you, Maria. We're going to go back to Craig. We have some more technical questions on the CARE Act. We have one that says on page 13 of the CARES Act, it states that they have to register their loan with their TIN no later than 15 days of which the loan is made. Where and how do they register this loan?
So you're as long as you've received your loan through one of the approved lenders, which you should have from the SBA, your loan docs are your guiding documents for the loan themselves. And that servicing lender is going to hold all rights to the loan and to the forgiveness as well. So there's no additional paperwork that needs to be completed on your loan, so long as, again, you've received your loan through a qualified lender. I know there's people still waiting in line to get loans. There's still some funds that haven't been depleted. Second round has not gone quite as fast. I think there was some additional requirements they put on lenders from an underwriting standpoint in the second round. But at the end of the day, if you've received your PPP loan, it's from a qualified lender. You just need to stay very close in touch with your lender to make sure that you, and we would recommend get in front of it sooner rather than later, because if you're working at a larger institution, like a Bank of America, PNC, a Chase Bank, I mean, they're servicing hundreds of thousands, if not up towards to maybe 1 million loans. So there's going to be a lot of people looking for that forgiveness. And one of the caveats is and this is systematic on all of the loans. There are no interest payments due on any of the loans for the first 6 months. So in order to maximize the opportunities from a cash flow standpoint, if you can deplete the funds in 2 months and be ready and prepared to ask for forgiveness, get that forgiveness by your lender in less than the 6 months, in theory, you will have gotten free money and never even made an interest payment.
Okay, thank you. This one is, before the shutdown, I had a few employees who worked overtime. If there is no overtime right now, that is already going to reduce some of their paychecks. If it was labeled overtime on their check, will that be taken into consideration when looking at a reduction in pay?
Well, overtime is driven out of the 40-hour rule in really all 50 states. So you have a mandate to pay at the time and a half for overtime hours, unless you're in a bargaining agreement scenario where maybe they've got some other rule, double time or something to that effect. But as far as looking at, if we're talking about if the question is, eligible compensation during the 8 weeks, that's going to be all compensation in the aggregate, regardless of straight time, time and a half, double time, bonus, taxable expenses, whatever it may be. So that'll be all in the aggregate for compensation, if that's what we're looking for, is that measurement during the 8 weeks.
Okay, we have a couple of questions that came in on the chat. So one is, does the extra FUTA being given to laid off employees affect the employer's experience rates?
So that's a great question. The answer to that is no. That extra $600 a week that is eligible up through the end of July is not to have an effect on any employer's experience rate for those additional funds, even though that money is paid through the state unemployment agency. What we are doing with all of our clients in Tryon is we're paying very close attention to what goes on right now, though, as far as assigning benefit payments to your experience rating for your unemployment account. With all due respect to any state unemployment agency, I can tell you, for example, yesterday, even yesterday, in our front lobby, there was a 14-inch box of state unemployment claims that we manage. That's the volume there isn't a state in the country that's ever seen this volume of unemployment claims at the same time. So we're spending a lot of time. We're going to be very strategically paying attention to making sure that we don't improperly get assigned some of that claims experience, because it should not be applied to your unemployment account.
Okay, great, thank you. Another one is, are we able to pay independent contractor with PPP funds or only W-2 employees?
So there is some limited 1099 compensation you can pay, but it's only in that 25% bucket. It's not in the 75 for wages. But there is, and if you drill down into the use area of the PPP loan and or talk to your tax advisor, there is some in 1099 expenses that you can make with that 25% portion.
Okay, great. Let's see here. I wanted to hit on one more. It was a pretty technical. On page 16 of the CARES Act, it says that as of the date on which the covered loan is dispersed, the business is assigned a North American Industry Classification System code beginning with 7-2. What is this for, and do they need to do anything with it?
No, that's just a mechanism they use at the SBA for tracking how the loan money was dispersed. Some folks may have already seen, there was a kind of a nifty little PowerPoint that at the end of the first round of funding, the $395 billion that went out, the SBA actually issued a PDF, and it's available. You can find it on the internet probably, that shows where all of that money went to, and it measures it by state, it measures it by business sector, it measures it by business size. So that's what they're using for a lot of measurements to show exactly where all that money went to.
Okay, great. And I want to jump over to Jeff. We have about 10 minutes left, so I want to get a couple things. Jeff, what are some very specific communication initiatives you've done at Tryon that some of our business members may find useful and helpful during this time?
Yeah, let's talk about both our internal audience and our external audience. So internally, we really felt like it was really important, as we talked about before, communicating with our staff, making sure that our team members felt like they were engaged, especially those who were working remotely. We had approximately half of our staff or so working remotely. And as Craig mentioned, we were considered an essential business, so we did have some staff working inside our office as well. But one of the things that we did, and I'll show you an example of it if you can see it. This is called the Trion Daily Update. And back in March 16th, we started developing this, which is basically a one-page newsletter bulletin newspaper that goes to our staff members every day. And it has been that way since March 16th. And so that's a very important communication tool. And I write that myself and do it every day. And part of the magic trick is distributing it to our employees exactly at 4 o'clock every day, so they can count on it. And there's some articles about COVID-19 reminders or suggestions or tips, or it may just have things that we're doing at Tryon that we think it's important to let our employees know about, or just something funny or interesting and that kind of thing. So it's really gone over really well, and I've gotten many comments from employees who are hoping that we will continue it beyond the pandemic, and so we'll be undoubtedly doing some version of that going forward. Externally, as Maria mentioned, and Craig, we've done a really nice job of starting in early March of communicating with our clients along the way, literally every day. Sometimes there were days when we were communicating and sending out notices and memos and client letters 2 or 3 times a day to inform them about the CARES Act or whatever it might be. And we've been doing I think a really nice job on that. We actually have a presentation that we just completed called the Tryon COVID-19 story that talks about talks about what we've done for our clients during this most difficult time, and that when our clients really needed us most. The other thing that some of you may have seen or heard is that we also did some radio advertising on WJR, and we currently have some television commercials that are running on Channel 7 and Channel 4 as well. And you'll notice that if you have seen those spots or have heard them on the radio, that we're very careful with those spots are really intended to show our empathy, first of all, our gratitude to frontline workers, but our empathy toward business owners, toward individuals who are concerned about their income going forward, and it had zero selling to it in the spot. We're very careful about that. We do have new TV commercials that will start in the next couple of days as well, that also talks about kind of what we've done for our clients and ensuring that their worksite employees. And some of you may not know that Tryon is a national company. We have 600 client companies that we work with and do payroll for about 50,000 of their client worksite employees. So it was our job to ensure that when they needed it most, that we made sure that they were paid on time and received the benefits they deserve. And we made sure that our client businesses were compliant with state and federal regulations. So we did that, never missed a beat, and have received really some amazing accolades from clients that boy, if we came through during this time, I can only imagine what you would do for other businesses going forward in regular times.
Jeff, I really liked your, if you want to talk about back to the internal, I really liked your point about having that communication at an expected time, especially such during a time that there's so much insecurity, that gives that moment of security at 4 o'clock that employees could expect that communication. Now, for people that might have had to furlough employees, would you have also included them in there? Do you suggest that they would do that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think, you know, the definition of a furlough would be the fact that you're expecting to bring them back at some point. And for those employees, really important to keep them engaged, to let them know what you're doing, how you're thinking, plans in place going forward. The fact that you have the spirit of engagement, and that you really do want them to feel like they're part of the team. It's really, really important. And again, love the fact that they can, and I've had many, dozens of employees of our team members tell me, I really look forward to 4 o'clock every day and getting that communication.
Great, thank you. I know we have been doing weekly Zoom meetings, staff meetings. Our staff just wants to be in that same space where we can see each other and talk openly. And so that communication is so important. I want to jump back to Maria, because as you're talking about, as Jeff's been sharing about what Tryon does for the community, Maria, your title has community outreach in it. You want to tell us a little bit about what that means and how Tryon helps communities?
Absolutely. We're hugely philanthropic. Hope Network is one of the charities that we donate to. We participate in a lot of their events, along with Dutton Farms is another charity that we're very involved with. On a personal level, I'm very much involved with Families Against Narcotics, Habitat for Humanity, the Macomb County branch, and several of the neighboring hospitals. We just feel it's really important to be really involved, not only from the business standpoint, but from the philanthropic standpoint, and we give back. It's part of our overall mission. We're very proud of it. We talk about it at our monthly meetings. We have various speakers come in and tell us about what they're doing, and our entire team is really engaged. I recall one time, 6-8 months ago, we had literally 3 charitable events on one night. We had employees in Royal Oak, some of us were in Detroit, some of us were in like the Auburn Hills area. We literally had to divide and conquer because we had so much going on, and Jeff is shaking his head because you remember that. We had so much going on, and that just talks about who we are as a whole. We not only truly appreciate the relationships that we have with our clients and partners, a great word, and thank you for mentioning that early, but we really are very passionate about what we can do in our communities as a whole, and it's our honor to be able to give back. And our team, we couldn't be more proud of them. When Jeff sends out a communication saying, hey, this is what we're doing, we need bodies in here, we have a lot of team members not only walking to help them, they're running, they're saying, what can we do? So it's just a real big part of our mission. We're really proud of that.
Great, thank you. We have about a minute left. So what I'd like to do is start with each of our panelists, and just if you have anything last minute of advice that you want to kind of capture where we go, we'll start with Craig, since we started with you at the beginning. You've done an amazing job answering some of the technical questions that people have had with the CARES Act. You know, at being the chamber, I spent the last several weeks being counselor and trying to help our members weed through this, and we really appreciate that expertise that you're sharing. Is there any last minute things that we might not have covered that you think is really important that our business members know?
You know, I would just wish the best for all your business members. I mean, we all absolutely need to get back to work. You know, the economics mandate that we get back to a normal society from a workflow. But I think it's important to keep all of this stuff in mind, that the regulatory environment is gonna do crazy changes for probably the next couple of years now, whether it be wage and hour issues, unemployment, workers' compensation, employee benefits, mandatory, maybe a discussion over mandatory healthcare changes that might happen with a new election in the fall. There's just going to be a lot of things that are going to be driven out of considerations that COVID introduced in the workplace, as opposed to safety and the like, as opposed to, you know, just dealing with your regular ordinary course compliance. So to the extent that you stay vigilant, grow your business again, remain focused, and find somebody like Tryon to work with you, we would highly recommend it, because there's going to be lots of changes ahead for sure.
Great, thank you so much. Jeff, let's jump to you.
Yeah, I'd just like to reinforce that small businesses have seen how easy it is to be overwhelmed in a crisis, how easy it is to be taken off your game, how difficult it is to stay focused on your core business. And so, like we talked about before, looking at vulnerabilities, looking at, you know, what would we do if we did it again? What do we wish that we were better prepared in during this COVID-19? What could we have done better? What if we were prepared more? Might we have avoided quite the extreme of that we've faced in our business? So again, partnerships that you can develop, like Craig said, with companies like Trion, and what to do now. But if this isn't a wake-up call, I don't know what could be. So to say to a small business, you're fragile. All businesses are fragile, but we don't need to be. Let's look at what we can do to prepare for the crisis. Let's look at those vulnerabilities, and let's plan for the next time, so we can be robust and strong and confident and decisive going forward.
And Jeff, maybe you could share with us the link and how to access your book, and we can put that on our website, so chamber members will have another resource.
Yeah, the book is available on Amazon.
Okay.
You know, again, the book is called The Crisis Counselor, a step-by-step guide to managing a business crisis.
Great, thank you. And Maria, you want to wrap up with some last-minute advice for our members?
I do, thank you. You know, first and foremost, one thing that we recognize through this pandemic is Tryon Solutions has not been client-centric. We've reached out to the community at large, and we've offered our support and our assistance. So I'd like to offer that to all of the chamber members as well. I know Craig, Jeff, myself, we're all willing to help answer any questions, be there to support. So we'll be putting out our contact information. Please don't hesitate reaching out. This is really it's uncharted territory and unprecedented times. And, you know, as Jeff mentioned, none of us could have predicted this happened, even though it has happened in history. I mean, if you asked me 3 years ago, would this happen? I'd shake my head no. And unfortunately it did. We're smack in the middle of it, but we're here to help you. So please don't hesitate reaching out.
Well, thank you again, Craig, Jeff, and Maria. You have been very helpful. I am appreciative of you sharing your expertise with our members who are trying so hard to survive and make sense of I call it like a roller coaster of regulations and changes every day. So sometimes several times a day. So we appreciate all of your advice and your guidance, and we appreciate Tryon as a member, and thank you for your time. Thank you everybody for joining us today. We hope that you found some valuable information, and keep watching our website where we'll continue to post updates and things on COVID regulations and PP loans and everything that we can do to assist you in keeping your business successful. Have a great day, everyone.
Thanks, Kelly.
Thank you, Kelly.
Thank you.
Thanks, Kelly. Bye now.
Bye-bye.